You are now tuned in to the Bassgorilla podcast. You are about to discover the best kept secrets in bass music and EDM production. Through exclusive interviews with the world's favorite producers and record label owners. Dubstep, drum and bass, Neurohop, glitch hop, and other futuristic bass music. Brought to you by
Robert Fumo.
Hello and welcome to the Bassgorilla podcast. My name is Robert Fumo. I have a great show for you today. We sat down with X-Ray Ted, also known as Andreas Nicholas. He's a UK producer and DJ, and he is well known for his X-Ray Tedits. He remixes all kinds of abstract tunes from Marvin Gaye to the tune he is going to break down for you today. The original tune that we are breaking down today is a Tanya Stevens track from 2004. It is a groovy and swangin' reggae tune, and X-Ray Ted wanted to do a rendition of his own and include it in his globe-trotting DJ sets. So what he did is he obviously basslined and glitched it out, and it is a club and festival banger. If you have not heard of X-Ray Ted, check out the podcast description. It will have all of his social media links. And if you have never heard of Tanya Stevens, Google search her and check out her music because she is a criminally underrated Caribbean vocalist, and she definitely deserves all the love and respect that we can give her because she has a ton of work out there and it needs to be listened to. So without further ado, I'm going to bring you X-Ray Ted and his breakdown of his remix of Tanya Stevens' track, It's a Pity.
Hey guys, what's going on? My name's Andreas Nicholas, also known as X-Ray Ted. I'm a DJ and producer from Bristol in the UK, specialising in funk, bass, disco, hip-hop and breaks. So to give you a quick summary of my background in music, I've been in and around the music industry since I was about 12 years old, playing in bands in my local venue. Then in about 2003, I bought a set of turntables and started playing hip-hop and funk. I'd describe my style as heavily sampled, taking my influences from hip-hop, funk and disco, but also from the electronic music that I grew up with. The way I got into production was when I switched from vinyl to digital, because I realized I was able to make edits and mashups. And this was all around the time that the label Ghetto Funk were really just popping off, and things just kind of got out of hand from there. So the track that I'm going to talk about and run you guys through today is my remix of Tanya Stevens' It's a Pity. It's a pity. You already have a wife. Again, this is an edit that I started making because I wanted to play the track live. I wanted it to fit into the set that I was making at the time, which was for Fozzy Fest in Canada on my first Canada tour. I originally just made an edit to play live and then realized I'd like there to be a drop here, and rather than mixing in, I thought I'd make my own synthesized drop. The original by Tanya Stevens is also one of my girlfriend's favorite songs. If you don't know the song, Good boy, it is a pity. Tanya Stevens is an awesome artist, and It's a Pity is one of the tracks that I knew well from her. There's a drum and bass remix of it. I didn't want to play the same old drum and bass remix that everybody had heard before. I really love the vocal, and there's not really much in the way of drums or heavy percussion in the track, so the song structure is a pretty standard basic structure. It's intro, breakdown, drop with a vocal, a heavy bass drop, and then background again. Obviously the track's made for festivals and clubs, and so I didn't want to do some crazy structure that would make it hard for me to DJ or for other people to DJ. I kind of assumed that if people are playing my music, they'll most likely want to play the track in the same way that I'd want to play the track. So as far as the song goes, the elements are actually fairly basic. There's the original sample, which I used, as I mentioned, Tanya Stevens, It's a Pity.
It's a pity you already have a wife.
There's these really heavy, funky drums. And then they're paired with a synthesized bass line. The drums are from a few different sample packs and then processed. The original track is fairly heavily sidechained from the kick and the snare, so there's a real nice dip and you get the real punch of the kick and the snare. The drums, I believe, are swung to 16E in Logic, which is one of my favourite ones. The space in between the notes gives a really funky, lively feel to the track. As far as the kick goes, I try to choose a sample that really suits what I'm doing. I've then pitched the kick to be in the same key as the original, which I think is something people miss out on quite a lot. And I've also done the same with the snare. The snare is 2 samples layered, one that has the top high-end snap and one for the punch. There's also some claps which are layered around the snare, I'd say. There's 3 claps, one centered, one hard panned left and one hard panned right. I feel like that gives your drums a really wide space while still being able to have the snare right in the middle. For the hats and the percussion, I actually used Slink's sample pack, which is awesome. You guys should check it out. And then the hats are all swung again with the 16E groove, which is the same way that I've warped the original sample, the It's a Pity sample. There's a little triangle in there, which is straight out of his sample pack, just re-swung. A little tip for compressing elements with the drums. I like to find out the frequency of where the punch of my kick and my snare are, then use a multiband compressor to just take that short frequency range out of the element that I'm sidechaining. So for example, if my snare has the punch about 200 Hertz, I'll use a multiband compressor to dip the 200 Hertz range so that that snare will come through the mix without dipping the whole volume of the element that we're sidechaining against. So for the bass line, I tend to write my sub or the melody of my bass first before getting into any synthesis whatsoever. And then I'll create multiple instances of Serum or Massive or whatever synth that I'm using for the bass. And then change envelopes, maybe change the wavetables, change a little bit of distortion. And what I like to do is I'll take the MIDI clip, which has the entire bass line written into it. Then I'll chop up that MIDI clip and move the individual notes or groups of notes to the different synths that I've created. So in regards to the processing of the bass is being sidechained with the kick and the snare, so that the kick and the snare punch through. So the main bass is actually just a plain old square wave. The bass is also run through a guitar amp or a distortion plugin, and then saturated, which I believe I did with the J37, which is a Waves plugin. It's fantastic. And then I've used an exciter, which is the Aphex Vintage Exciter, also a Waves plugin. And then on top of this, I've layered a formant square to give a real gritty high end to my main bass. There's a separate sub, which is something that I tend to do for most of my tracks. I'll roll off my synthesized bass lines at around 100 Hertz and then EQ my sub so that it's only coming from 100 Hertz down. This way I've got a lot more control. As for the sound space, I've kept most of my bass line pretty centralized with my kick and my snare. The formant square has been widened just to give the bass a little bit more of a depth and a width. I've slightly panned the hi-hat and some of the percussion, both left and right, to give it a little bit of width to the drums too. I tend to use the S1 imager from Waves. I tried to give a lot of width to my effects. There's a few risers, some syncs, some lasers, and an explosion. And I tried to give it a little bit of width to these just so that it livened up the whole track. it's really important to give space for everything, not only in your frequency range, but when you're creating your stereo imaging too. The things that I'd say to new producers are, a lot of people get really caught up in having the right hardware, having these specific monitors, having a hardware synth, or having this piece of software. And at the end of the day, what's really important is the idea and the vibe and the groove of the track. Mixing down and synthesis is really something that you can learn along the way. There's a lot of tutorials, but unless you're doing something that you're passionate about and that you really care about and you're feeling the vibe of, the track's never going to take off. So to me, what's important is keeping the vibe and the feeling of the track, something that you're proud of, and making the most of what you've got. Another really important thing for me is sending my stuff to people who I respect and that I know have a really good understanding of production, and taking constructive criticism. I don't want to send a track to someone for them to just come back and say, yeah, man, that's dope. That's the worst piece of feedback that you can get, in my opinion. If someone says, yeah, that's dope, but I think you could work on this, fantastic. I think it's really important in the writing process to not be too precious. If you need to scrap something in your track that's not making the track work, even if you're really proud of it, it's important to get rid of that element. Even if you've got the greatest snare, if it's not working for the track, it's not the greatest snare. Everything has to be in context.
And now for a complete playthrough of X-Ray Ted's edit of Tanya Stevens' 2004 tune, It's a Pity. Well, that is our show, ladies and gentlemen. I want to give another huge shout out to Tanya Stevens and X-Ray Ted for giving us the content that made this show possible today. Also want to thank you for tuning in. If you like the show and would like to hear other artists, you can head over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review, and in the comments section, let us know who you'd like us to interview. Also, you can send us messages via our Facebook page. Also, we're on YouTube. We have a massive channel with a bunch of free content there. You can holler at me on Twitter at 303fumo. And until next time, this is the Bassgorilla podcast. I appreciate you tuning in. So peace, love, and sine waves.
Dubstep, drum and bass, Neurohop, glitch hop, and other futuristic bass music. Brought to you by
Robert Fumo.